In this video, I'm going to show you how to create custom textured buttons that scale and tile based on the button's text size. Here I have a fresh Godot project open. One thing I did bring in here beforehand are a few textures that we're going to use. We have three buttons here. We have a greenish button, yellow button, and a bluish button. So we're going to try to create our custom button using these three states for the button. One when we hover over it, one where it's in a neutral position, and one when we actually click on the button. First, let's create our main scene here. I'll call it main. Now, first thing I want to point out here is you might be wondering, why don't we use a texture button? Because technically, this might be able to give us what we need, right? Well, let's take a look here. For a texture button, you'll notice that there are textures that you can use for normal, hover, pressed, which is pretty much what we're looking for. So let's just try this out and see how it looks. So this is the normal, this is the pressed green one, and hover is the blue. So let's just save that. And technically, I guess this kind of works, right? But one thing you have to realize here is that there's no text. So how do we get text there? We will need to add a label. A label, we'll add some text to it. And we do need to get this in a better spot. So let's try putting it right in the center of this texture. Okay, so there. Doesn't look too bad. Let's just change the color here. Colors, font color, and make that black. And let's just make this a little bit larger here. Maybe it's a little too large. There we go. Okay, so looks like we kind of have something going here, right? Let's see how it looks. Great. Okay, so this kind of works, but to be fair, this is the approach I was taking previously, but I realized that this would actually require some effort if we were to say, for example, we have something called new game. Okay, sure. Let's try this. Now, let's just get some structure going here. So we have a button here, and we want to put a button right below it. So we have new game, load game. That's not too bad because they are roughly the same size. Once you start getting into different sized buttons though, and I guess this doesn't actually showcase what I'm trying to demonstrate, but what we can do here now is, let's just say there's a very long button, because these look mostly fine, except this one probably has to be justified to the middle. There, we can do that. Let's actually do that for all of them. So let's justify centered. Let's try this. Let's try to make a very long button. This button has a lot of text. And you can see the problem here is it starts to get a little ugly. So what I want to do is to be able to create a button that has my texture, but also scales with the text that I have on that button. Now, there are a few options we can do here. So if we scale this, you notice that the texture starts to look a little weird. Now let's ignore the fact that the label is not actually on the button, on the texture right now. Let's just look at how this texture looks. So you can see that it is scaling, but imagine if this starts to get to become a very long button. And you can see that, and I know this is just gibberish right now, but you can see that the button is starting to look a little weird, right? It's getting stretched out completely. So ideally, at least my intention for this button was to be able to have this sort of pattern that repeats itself as the button gets larger. We can't simply just scale it that way. And as you can see here as well, it's looking also a little weird. Obviously, these buttons should have been scaled as well, but they're not. Let's see what we can do here. Scale. So technically, if this is what you're going for, then this will work. Just set all these to be scaled and you're good. But what if you want to have that proper tiling of these textures? Another problem we have here is, what if we want the buttons to actually scale individually? Right now, they're all scaling to the size of the container. I spent a long time trying to figure out how to get around this, and I wanted to show how I did it, my solution to this, and how it works. So let's delete these. First, let's create our first button. Now, what I'm going to do is I want to be able to have a scaled texture. Now, there is something called NinePatchRect, which is pretty neat. What NinePatchRect allows you to do is automatically scale and tile textures based on their outer regions. So for textures where you want to create a repeating pattern and not have the sides and corners stretched out, this is the perfect use case. So we have a label. Let's put some text on it so we can see what we're doing. And then we have a texture. Great. Okay. So what we're going to do though is change this texture so it shows behind its parent. So now we have something going here. Looks a little ugly. Let's change the label to be a darker text so we can see this better. I'll go to theme overrides, font color, make it black. Let's actually make this a little bit larger. It's a bit small as well. I have to zoom in pretty far. Okay, so notice right now that based on the size of my label, this texture is actually scaling based off that, which is great. Because now what we can do is we can have multiple labels and each label can be something else and it should scale. Actually, in this case, it's not scaling. Let's actually, I think the reason for this is, I remember now. This should be shrink center. There we go. Okay, so that was my mistake. They should be, container sizing should be set to shrink center. So now you can see that we have something working here where we have 3 buttons, different sized texts. So we have these 3 buttons. They are working the way we are expecting them to work in terms of scaling, but you see that the textures are still kind of being stretched out. So here's where the magic of the NinePatchRect comes in. So using the NinePatchRect, we can now actually tile the edges. So what we can do here is that we set around there. And this takes a bit of time to play around with. So I know it doesn't look great right now, but the biggest thing to change here is the axis stretch. So right now these are set to stretch. What we want to do is set it to tile. And there you go. You kind of see that it's starting to look a little bit better. The one thing that I personally prefer to use is the tile fit, because tile fit does a combination of both. It'll kind of it'll fit as much as it can, but then stretch out as it needs to. So it doesn't look too weird. So here we can just kind of go back and see this is what tile looks like, and tile fit, it kind of does a little bit of stretching, so it kind of fits a little bit better. But this still looks a little weird, right? So let's try to change this. And I will change this again as we go along here. So actually, this should probably fit better like this, to be honest. Let's just change the sides. Yeah, so this looks much better. So it's good to be able to see both the actual button and this region editor, because then you can actually see what you're doing and how it's going to look. Think of it as a bit of a preview. So I see there's a little bit of a weird gap there, but let's see if we can change that. Okay, that still looks a little weird. I think it has to actually just go like this. I mean, I think that's pretty decent. It's not too bad. There, it's much better. Okay. So it's looking much better, right? So the one other thing though is we have a bit of a weird thing going on with the text here. The text it's going beyond the edge of the texture, and it's kind of expected right now because we set the texture to be exactly the size of the label. So the anchors I've already set to full rect, meaning it will take up the entire space of its parent, but we can set these to be at certain points. So let's set some offset. So on the left, let's say we want to go a little bit beyond that. So maybe 20, -25, it should be good. And on the right side, again, to be consistent, let's make it 25. So I can see we can probably add a little bit more of a spacing there. So let's do a -30 here and then 30 there, and And there, it's a little bit better. Now I can play with this a little bit more. I can add extra buffer on the top and at the bottom. Really, it's up to you, right? But you have the ability to do that here. That's the majority of what you need to do here. So we'll delete these. Let's actually make this its own scene. This is going to be a button. And I know you're probably thinking, why do you create a label? It should be a button. We will get there. Now, what we can do is we can instantiate this button multiple times. There, okay, there you go. You're able to now have custom textures that scale based off of the size of your text. So that's pretty awesome. Let's make some more realistic text for the buttons. And let's actually add a little bit of separation here because it's a little bit too close. There you go. Maybe make it even more. Okay, cool. So that's great, but there's a few things missing here. One, we're only using, let's just actually try to play this and see how it looks. So right now, for one, these are labels, so we can't even click on these. And two, because we can't even click on them, well, we can't even hover over them. There's nothing happening when we hover over them. Remember, you wanted to add a bit of an effect when you hover over them, and you also want to be able to add an effect when we click on them. So this is a starting point, but this is not what we're looking for. So let's go into this label, change this now to a button. I'm going to call this a custom button, and we're keeping our texture the way it is here. Great. Now that we have a custom button, let's just see how this looks. Now we can kind of see, okay, now these are buttons and they are still scaling with the texture. So this is another step in the right direction. Let's just remove some of this weird gray stuff. So the reason why there is a gray background now with this button is that is actually the default look for the button. What you can do here is clicking on the flat flag here, and this will actually turn it into almost an invisible button where only the text shows up. Now if we take a look, looking much better, right? And we can still click on it. Great. Now we have actual button. How do we actually get this to change based on hover? Because on a button, since we're not using a texture button, there is no option here to set the texture. So that's a bit of a problem, right? Well, I'm going to show you how to add some custom scripts to be able to have the same effect of a texture button, but being able to scale based on the text of the button. So what we're going to do first is call this a neutral button texture. We're going to copy this and we're going to call this one hover button texture. We are going to change the texture. So what I'm going to do is test this a little bit more. So you notice there's a little bit of a weird thing going on there. Let's just see if the yellow one looks mostly okay. This one looks a little weird. I am going to edit this slightly. Because it is a different texture, we will need to modify it. So that looks much better. And then I'm going to create a clicked button texture. This is going to be similar, but we are going to have the green. And again, because it is a different texture, I will need to adjust this slightly. So there, that looks good. Now let's just see how our custom button looks now in our main scene. There you go. Let's try playing this. We can see that it's still scaling well. Right now it's green because we haven't set any logic yet, but these are buttons that can be clicked on that don't do anything yet, but we are going to set up the logic now to have the same effect that a texture button would have, but with actual scaling of the texture based on the text of the button, which is our main goal here. To do this, we are going to need some custom scripts. What I'm going to do is create a new script for our custom button. We can call it custom button, and actually I forgot to change it to C# because I do use C# primarily for my game development. I'm going to edit the script. We need three things. We need to know when we are hovered over the button. We need to know when we're hovered off the button. And we also need to know when we've clicked the button. So first thing is we also need to know what these textures are. So essentially what's going to happen is when we are hovered over the button, it should turn blue. When the button is not hovered over, it should turn yellow. And when it's clicked on, it should turn green. Notice that we have 3 textures here. And the way we're going to simulate a button texture is to adjust the visibility of all of these textures based on the state of the button. Let us give that a try. First, we need a reference to the textures. So what we'll do is private 9patchrect neutral button, hover button, and click button. We are then going to assign these on ready. So neutral button equals get node 9patchrect. We will copy this, and the same goes for the rest. So okay, the next thing we need to do is create functions for each of these states. For this, I'm going to switch to my IDE because it is a lot easier with autocomplete. What we're going to do is mouse entered, create a function for that. So when we hover over, what we want to do is have the hover button visible, but the neutral and click buttons should be false. Same thing here. When the mouse is off the button, we want now the neutral state to be visible, and then the others will be not visible. And when we have down, then we will have the click button visible. Back to our Godot engine. Let's see, what do we have here? Build the project, and there we go. We have something going here. So there's a little weirdness here. So first thing is we have this white rectangle around, which is really, it's part of the button. There's nothing wrong with it necessarily. It looks a little ugly because we don't want the default button texture to be there, right? We want to have textures that we want, which is these textures here. So it looks a little ugly. We can change that. Another thing is I don't really like the white font that's showing up here. I think when the buttons are highlighted, there's already a visual indicator. So we don't need the text to also turn white. So I want the text to stay black. And another thing is once you do click on it, it does turn green, but it stays green and it doesn't turn back to the hovered state, which is we're hovered on it right now, right? So I want it to be able to turn back to blue after I click on it. So let's fix these. The first thing to fix is the rectangle outline for the button can be changed. Here on the buttons styles, we can actually add a new style box empty. Now, when it's empty, you can see that there's no more white box that shows up. So that's pretty awesome, very quick. Another thing to change is the font color. Now that can be done here again in the theme overrides. When the font is hovered over, want it to be black, and font focus black. Probably all of this should be black. Anything with the font color should be black. Now let's see how that looks. All right, looking more like it. Now the last thing to fix is the button up. We want the texture to be the same state as if it were hovered over. So button up, essentially going to be very similar to what we have for hover. We want it to show up as hovered and everything else is not showing. So let's now take a look at what we have. And there you go. So that's pretty much it. Now we can have a very nice custom, and these are actually here. We'll start this from scratch. So see, now you create this neat little texture and you want to be able to put any font you want, any text you want on that textured button and be able to have it scale. So now we can have as many as we want. We can change any text we want and they will all scale as much as you need to. And there you have it. So let's try running this just to see if it works the way you want it, and looks like it does. So there's a few things here we can improve on, obviously. Maybe we want the text, the buttons to be bigger because it's a little small. Let's just quickly see if we can change that. Thought these were actually larger when I first looked at it. So to change the size, we can easily just change the font size. Let's make this a bit larger for the button. And let's try running this. Oh, it might be a little too big now. There you go. So now it's a bit more clear. We can see that there's probably some more spacing we can add around the button. But other than that, this looks pretty awesome. So obviously the only thing really missing here is actually having some functions with these buttons. The great thing about this is that these are just buttons. So you would do the same thing you normally do with buttons. You would need to have a specific call for each button. When they're pressed, you need to assign a method that's called. So very quickly, just to demonstrate how to add functionality to these buttons, we have an exit button here. Let's get the node path for this. We will go to our main script and we will get our custom button, exit button. And then we need to, as much as I like autocomplete, sometimes I want to do it a more cleaner way. We can move this. And we will quit when we click on the exit game button. So let us give this a try now in Godot. As you can see, these buttons don't do anything except exit. There we go. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Thank you so much if you made it this far. This is one of the neat solutions I came up with to be able to use the textures the way I expected to use them. And I was a little disappointed that the texture button didn't work the way I expected it to work. Hopefully this was useful to you. If you enjoy this video, please give a like. I really appreciate it. And hopefully next time I will be able to show you some more tips and tricks in Godot. This is my first time creating this type of video, so I'd love to hear what you think. What you liked, what you didn't like, what other topics you'd like to see. Let me know in the comments. Thanks again for watching.